folks, in this fairly short film I'm going to be making a gallon of apple cider from my own apples from my trees. Okay, so I've got a large amount of apples in 2 pans and I'm breaking these down with steam. So I've cut the apples in half, put a bit of water in the bottom of each one, and I'm going to leave these now for a good hour or so, maybe a bit longer, and they'll break down. We'll take it from there. So a couple of hours have actually passed. Let's have a look at that steam build up. And I'm just going to rotate what's at the bottom to the top, and you can see the ones that are coming up are really mushy. You might also be able to see, if it doesn't steam up, that the liquid level has risen dramatically in there. So I'm just rotating them round so the ones at the bottom don't burn to the bottom of the big pan. Now the level of apples in here has shrunk. Right, I'm just going to get all this in one pan together. It didn't fit all in one pan when the apples were whole, or before they'd started to mush. There's still some in there that are a little bit hard, but what I'm going to do, I've turned the heat off. What I'm going to do is put the lid on, just leave the heat and the steam in there, and they will all break down. I'm just going to leave it for a few hours for them to go cool. Hey folks, it's actually a couple of days later. Let's have a look at those apples. So here they are, and now they're all nicely smushed, and what I'm going to do is use this potato masher to just break them up a little bit more. This is just the first stage of breaking them down. The next stage will involve pushing them through a sieve, and for the eagle-eyed amongst you, you might have spotted that there are 2 cherries in the pan as well, just because I found 2 cherries going stray in the fridge, so I've added them to it. So next, using a sieve, I'm going to strain my apples into another saucepan. So with a clean plastic spoon, I'm just going to put a couple of spoonfuls into this sieve and demonstrate this once. I don't own an apple press, so this is how I press my apples, okay? Wooden spoon and sieve. This is the first stage of the actual pressing. So what I'll be left with is a liquidy mush in the pan underneath, and then the sieve will keep bits of skin, bits of pip, bits of core, stalk and other things which won't push through the sieve with the wooden spoon. That will go on the gardener's compost. It's the liquid stuff that goes through which is the gold. Right, I'll come back to you in a couple of minutes when I've done this sieve. Okay, that's the first sieve full done, so you can see that's the mush that I've got underneath. That's what's going to go into compost, and I've got a very long way to go. So I'll get back to you in about half an hour or so when this is done. See you then. Okay, that's done. So there's a pan full of apple mush, which is quite liquidy, but it's still very thick, and I need to separate the liquids from the solids again. And that's the waste product which is going on the garden. And yeah, there's plenty of washing up. So what I'm going to do with this, I don't usually use tap water, but what I'm going to do with this is I'm just going to add a little bit of tap water to it, because I need to loosen it up. And I'm not adding tons in, I'm just adding a little bit, just to make it a bit of a less thick liquid. Okay, the next setup now is a muslin cloth over a colander, and that's going to go over this pan. So here's my liquefied apple, and it's simply a case now of going like this and into the colander, filling the colander up and letting the liquid drip through. The muslin cloth incidentally has been boiled, so it is clean, but the liquid that comes through this will be brought to the boil one more time before I add it to the demijohn, just to kill off any bacteria. Okay, I need to leave that to trickle through for a bit. So I'm just going to put this lid on top to keep out any contaminants that I can do, really. Okay, I've got the same setup now with my big deep saucepan. I've had to empty the apple puree out into 2 different woks, because this is one that I want to collect a lot of juice in. And then that goes. And you can hear the liquid very easily dripping through. So at this point, it's just a case of waiting for the liquid to drip through and for the level of the apples to go down so I can keep topping it up. It's going to take all day. I'm leaving the apple to strain for at least 24 hours. So there's nothing else I can really show you today. We'll have a look at what's left in the muslin cloths tomorrow, so I'll catch you then. Just as an update, I've had to go to 3 pans. There's that much of it. See you tomorrow. Okay folks, it's the next day. It's about 22 hours later. Let's have a look at what we've got. So you can see that the juice has come out of the apples, and what we've got left there is basically a cake of the apple pulp. Now this is not what I'm using in the cider, but that cake will actually be used to make applesauce and apple flapjacks. Not in this film today, but the juice that's come through there is definitely going to get used. So just out of interest, I want to see how much of that apple cake there is. The wok that I've got here weighs 1176, so whatever difference between that is and the weight of the apple cake in there will tell me what that weighs. So there's the first lot in from just the smallest one, and just from that smallest one I've managed to get that much juice extracted, so this is going to be good. Okay, that's all the apple mush, and I can see that I've got almost 3 kilos of it based on the original weight of the wok. Okay, so this is the juice and some water that's been extracted from the apples. I'm going to take the gravity reading of this now just to see what this could come out at in terms of an alcohol by volume at the end of the brew. Okay, so I've put a sample of the juice here in this hydrometer tube. Let's have a look at the gravity as it currently stands. So the gravity as it currently stands is 1.034. It's not enough, so I'm going to add some brew sugar to it to increase that. I'd like to get it up to about 1.050 or thereabouts. Right, I'm going to put some brew sugar in then. So it's just dextrose monohydrate brew sugar. I'm using this instead of standard household caster sugar because I get better results. So these scales have been zeroed already, so that's 228 grams. And pop that in. Let's have a look there, 416. Yeah, actually there's a bit more. That's fine, I'm not going to add any more than that. So there's just over 600 grams gone in there. So I've got this in the big pan now on the hob, and I'm going to put the heat onto this. And I want this to come to a simmer. Now the reason that I'm bringing this to a simmer is twofold. Firstly, I need to dissolve the brew sugar, but secondly, there's a fair chance that some bacteria may have been introduced into the liquid because it has, it's not been a completely sterile process getting that liquid out of the apples. So by boiling that now or bringing it to a simmer, it will kill off any harmful bacteria which could spoil the brew and turn it into vinegar. So I'm going to let this come to a simmer. I'll come back to you then. Okay, so this is actually about an hour later. And we can see we've got a good simmer on there. Well, you might not be able to see through the steam, but it's simmering nicely. So I'm going to leave it to simmer for 2 minutes, then I'm turning it off, then I've got to leave it to cool down. So I'll get back to you this evening when I put this cider together in the demijohn. Catch you then. Morning folks, it's actually the next day. I've let the apple mixture cool down for 24 hours overnight. It's now room temperature. It's now time to put this recipe together. So let's call this brew day 1 because this is the day that the yeast will be going into it. And I'm going to begin by pouring the apple mixture through a funnel into my demijohn. So this is just the smushed apple water with sugar. It smells absolutely wonderful. Now I've overfilled my demijohn, I'll show you in a second. I don't mind because I'm going to fit a blow-off pipe. I've got more liquid than what I need for the demijohn, so I don't mind. So this is what my demijohn looks like, and yeah, it is overfilled, but I don't mind, like I say, and I'm going to keep some liquid in reserve, so once it has blown through and it creates some space, I can then top it back up. So I'm going to put a dry funnel in there, and I'm going to start to add the bits and pieces now that I need in the brew for it to work. So the first thing I'm going to put in is a heaped teaspoonful or a rounded teaspoonful of pectolase. I'm hoping this will help to break down the haziness caused by boiling the apples. It might not, and if it doesn't, so be it. Worst case scenario is I end up with a cloudy cider. Not really anything to cry about. The next thing I'm going to add is a rounded teaspoonful of yeast nutrient. Now, I don't think it particularly needs a nutrient in there because it will be very nutritious because of the amount of micro apple fibres, but do you know what? I just put it in anyway. I don't think my yeast is going to complain for having too much to eat. Finally, my yeast of choice today is Lalvin 71B. And I've only used this yeast a couple of times so far. It seems to activate and work quite quickly. The instructions do say to make a little bit of a yeast bath first and, you know, let it come alive, but I just chuck it straight in and it works just fine. So I'm going to put, it's kind of like a mini rounded teaspoon. It's not heaped, and that's enough. So here's the situation currently. The yeast is rested on top. That will start to fall down. So here's my blow-off pipe. It's just a plastic siphoning tube, which I've got a metal drink straw in to keep rigid, and then a bung at the bottom end. I'm just going to give it a rinse. And then I'm going to shove that in the top. And this is quite a wide-necked demijohn. It's not like my typical ones. So the bung goes right in, but that's fine. The end of the tube is going to go into this plastic container that I'm just going to put some water in the bottom of. And I'll leave the blow-off pipe on for about 3 days. After that, it should begin to calm down. So here is the setup. See the tube in the bottom of there. So when the yeast begins to feed and fermentation begins, it will create CO2 inside here. That will then travel up here, down there, and come through the water in bubbles. This is basically one big airlock, and it prevents contamination through airborne particles getting in there and oxidation. So I need to take an original gravity reading, so I'm just going to pour this in. And let's see what I've got. It's slightly higher than what I'd planned on it being, but I'm not going to worry. It's 1.062, 1062. So I'm probably going to be looking at an 8% plus cider here. So I'll have a cheeky nifter, see what it tastes like. It's absolutely delicious. It's extremely thick, it feels. Massive apple flavours and very, very sweet, as you would imagine. It's nice. Okay, so that's my demijohn labelled up. It's a cider, it's 1.062 original gravity, and today's date is the 5th of the 10th, 22. So this is brew day 1. Let's see when fermentation begins. I've got to go to work shortly, and I won't be back for about 8 hours, but I'll be very surprised if fermentation hasn't begun by the time I get back. I'll give you an update then. See you later, folks. Well, an absolutely rotten day outside, but it is 8 hours later. I did say I'd give an update. And fermentation hasn't even started, surprisingly. So yeah, I'm surprised. I thought I was going to come home to bubbles, but nothing. We'll have a look again this evening. Okay, it's actually the next morning, so this is brew day 2. And you can definitely see that we have a krausen, which is formed on there. I'm not seeing tons of bubbles coming through the blow-off pipe yet, but we can say that fermentation has definitely begun. Incidentally, I've moved this into the living room just because it was a few degrees warmer with it being near the fire. So a quick brew day 3 update. And you can clearly see that the blow-off pipe is doing its job, although nothing's blown through yet. So it's only brew day 3. I'll give it another 3 days, I think, before deciding whether or not to fit a standard airlock. Good evening from the kitchen, folks. It's 8 weeks since my last film. This is day 57 of the pressed apple cider. Let's have a look at it. So here you can see it is still a very, very unclear liquid, and it isn't going to clear. There's a minimal amount of sediment in the bottom of this, but this is pectin haze, and it really won't really clear any much more than that. I mean, it might over months clear a little bit, but it's not worth waiting for. I might as well get it bottled. You can see that there's zero activity in the airlock, and this fermented very nicely for about 2 weeks, and then after that it slowed down, and then for the past 3 or 4 weeks it's done nothing whatsoever. I've had it somewhere cold, but it hasn't helped it clear. So today it's all about getting it out of that demijohn and into these bottles. Let's crack on. So I've got my 6 bottles in the sink, ready for some priming sugar. So I'm going to use about this much sugar, which represents about 1.5 teaspoonfuls. This is standard household kitchen caster sugar, nothing fancy, and this will help this cider to develop a carbonation. So when the yeast, which is in suspension within that cider, finds this sugar, there'll be a very fractional fermentation, and that will lead to a build-up of CO2, which leads to pressure, which leads to bubbles in the final product. Fingers crossed. Right, I'm going to get the bung out. I'm going to pop the siphoning tube in. I'll just turn this around, see if we can see the bottom of the tube. And in fact, there it is. It's about 0.5 centimetre or 5 mil above the sediment line, which is just fine. The first bit that comes out might be slightly milky, but that doesn't matter because it's going to be going into the hydrometer tube. And as they say in Hull, let's rock and roll. Oh, hydrometer first. I forget myself sometimes. Right, and now into the bottles. It was all that Hull talk. Thinking of the Ebenezer Morley hour. So that's coming out, and as you can see in the bottles, really no clarity to it, but I'm not going to worry about it. Cloudy drinks are acceptable. So I'm hoping to fill 6 bottles. I may end up having to top the last one up with the hydrometer tube. If it's very short though, I might just have it as a sampler tonight. And there we go, bubbles in the siphoning tube. Tell me this is over. Will I or won't I? Okay, before I go any further, I want to work out the final gravity for this brew. So in goes the hydrometer. And that sank very nicely. And this is finished on a final gravity of 0.998. Let's work out that alcohol by volume. So I take the original gravity of 1.062. I deduct from that the final gravity of 0.998, and that equals 0.064. And then I multiply this figure by 131.25, which equals, drumroll please, 8.4%, a nice strong cider. So I'm really happy with that as a final ABV. It's still cider at 8.4%. Anything over that, we're getting into wine territories. But yeah, very, very good for me. So I've just got to deal with bottle number 6, see if I can get that one filled up. So I'm going to use some of the milky stuff that's in here. I don't think it really hurts, to be honest. I think at this stage, I just need to make do with what I can. And then I noticed that 1 or 2 bottles had got a little bit more in than the others. I'll just go around the bottles. Okay, that's worked out well enough. Let's get those bungs in. Right, my bungs are plastic and they've been softening in very hot water, which has also given them a final clean. Time to get these out of here. Okay, so first bung out, and bottle number 1. Protect my hand because these can hurt, and push. and that's gone in nicely. I've got to repeat this 5 more times. I'll come back to you when I've done them all. So all my bungs are now in place. It's time to add cages. So the cage will hold the bung in place, because when that fractional fermentation takes place within the bottle, pressure will build up and that bung will go out like a missile. The cage stops that from happening, in theory. Okay, that's the first one on nice and tight. I've got another 5 to do. I'll come back to you when I've done them. Okay, that's all the bottles bunged and caged. Let's give them a little shower. They've got plenty of sticky residue on them and I'd like to get that washed off. Okay, that's my bottles cleaned and dried. Let's get those labels made. Okay, I've got this Fomemo Bluetooth label printer, which is connected via an app to my iPhone. So I've made just a basic label with that template. So I say OK. And I tell it to print the label that I want 6 copies. And print now. Isn't that nice? So just get these labels on, try and do it as neatly as possible. Sometimes easier said than done. That one was all right though. Now these are really lovely bottles. These are Aldi bottles. It's a rosé sparkling wine that they do that my neighbour buys, and she always donates me the bottles. But the texture of the glass and the shape of the bottle means that labelling can be a bit of a problem sometimes. I've got to do it high up on the neck. Try and get it right. Actually, that's worked out nicely. And there they all are, like very happy chappies. So welcome to the living room, folks, where my cider is now going to condition for the next 4 to maybe 6 weeks. This time of year, it's not as warm as it is in summer, obviously. The living room is somewhere between 18 and 21 overall. I've got my bottles up here. Let's have a look. And you can see up there, it's 18.7. And underneath that shelf, there's a light also, which keeps it warm. But the main heat source for the room is down here. And that is the wood burner, which has been on all day long. And it's obviously warm enough for things to ferment. So it's warm enough technically for things to condition, but it just takes a little bit longer at this time of year. The conditioning process will develop the flavour and the sparkle, and ultimately that's what will turn it into that cider that I want, that goes pop when I open the bottle and fizzes in the glass. Hopefully it tastes nice too. Okay, so I'll catch you sometime early 2023. It will be between 4 and 6 weeks from now. See you then. Good evening from the kitchen, folks. It's my pressed apple cider grand opening night. This is brew day 101, and this has been conditioning for 6 weeks. Now, I'm pretty sure that it will have sparkled because I can see that the bung has slightly raised by maybe 2 millimeters or so, something like that. Now, it's not clear, and I didn't expect it to be clear. This is pectin haze. However, there is an ugly layer of sediment in the bottom, and lesson learned, I've bottled this too early. So I've actually made a perry in exactly the same way, and I'm leaving that in the demijohn for a lot longer before I bottle it. Now, I want to show you something before I open this, because before this went in the fridge, it looked like this. Now look at that ugly layer of scum in the top of the bottle, and I was quite concerned. Was it mould? Have I created a vinegar mother? What is it? Now, the fact that I've put it in the fridge and it sank into the sediment suggests to me that it's some sort of trub, and this was still doing some fermenting in the bottle, potentially. So I could end up with something that's quite fierce and lively, potentially, with this. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking and open it. So I'm hoping for something that at least tastes nice and smells nice. I mean, it doesn't look that pretty, let's face it. But onwards and upwards. Let's hope it tastes very appley. Okay, so I've got the cage off. Now, am I going to get a pop? Yes! Ha-ha! And vapour. Get in! Woohoo! I love it when that happens. Right. So immediately I can see bubbles rushing to the top of the bottle. Let's see how this pours. Into my Belgian Bruegel glass. Lovely stuff. I'll just be happy with that for a second. Right. Now it does smell very nice. It smells extremely appley. More so than most ciders that I've ever made on the nose, which quite often smell like a dry wine. It's very appley. Wow, it's quite dry. Now, what ballpark am I going to put this in? I'll have another drink. It's not medium dry. It's possibly between dry and medium dry, but it's nearer dry than medium dry. But the apple flavour is there and it gives it a nice roundness. So it starts off with quite a dry raking on the tongue, but then you get the apple edge, and that is quite nice. So despite its ugly appearance, and despite the fact that it had that nasty trub ring round the top before it went in the fridge, it's actually not bad drinking. It's pretty good actually. I'm fairly happy with this. In terms of taste, in terms of smell, it's spot on. It just doesn't look that pretty. So lesson learned with this one. Next time I'm making a cider, or indeed a perry, as I'm doing now, from pressed fruit, like I've done this time, leave it for longer in the demijohn before bottling. The pectin haze is something I'm never going to get round. Even with as much pectolase as I want to put in there, I still think I'm going to get pectin haze, but I can get over that. It does taste good. It's very full-bodied. It's got a big fruit flavour. So cheers, folks. It's been fun as always. Hope you've enjoyed the film. Please like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. It's massively appreciated. It really does help. Thank you. And I'll catch you on the next brew or cooking film or whatever that may be. The film that you've just watched is a Moss Home & Garden production. You can find more by going to www.mosshomeandgarden.co.uk. I'd just like to say thank you very much for supporting my YouTube channel and for watching my films. It really is very much appreciated. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my YouTube channel in order to receive future updates about the home and garden films which I upload. You can find my YouTube channel by going to www.mosshomeandgarden.co.uk. Please click on the red subscribe button. When you've done that, a little bell will appear. If you press that also, then you'll get future updates about the films which I upload. If you like my films, if you like my style of filming, then you might also like my travel channel, which you will find by going to youtube.com/Stuart Moss or type in www.mosstravel.tv. Again, if you could subscribe to that channel, it would be hugely appreciated. If you'd like to get Moss Home and Garden updates on Facebook, then please open Facebook and do a search for Moss Home and Garden, and you will find the page. If you like the page, then you will get future updates on there. And if you'd like to connect on Instagram for home, garden and travel photography, as well as some stories, then my username is StuMoss, STUMOSS. If you'd like to connect on Twitter, then my username is @StuartMoss. And if you'd like to contact me about film usage or any other issue, please just email me on stewmosshomegarden@gmail.com. Once again, thank you very much for supporting my channel, for watching my films. I do appreciate it. I'd just like you all to have a great day.